welcome you to a public lecture in the Science and Heritage series. The lecture is by Dr. Purnima Bhatt, who is a professor of history, anthropology and interdisciplinary studies at Hood College, USA, where she has taught since 1977. She completed her BA and MA in Indian history from Delhi University, was a postgraduate at Harvard University, and eventually did her PhD in African history from Harvard University. Dr. Bhatt is her most recent book, titled Her Space, Her Story, Exploring the Stepwells of Gujarat, has just been published by Zuban.
Women appear as silent spectators on the stage of history, not active participants. Recent scholarship points to an urgent need to call into question why women's lives, their contributions and perspectives and achievements have been so vastly neglected. There is a compelling urgency, I believe, to correct the historical record to more accurately reflect women's perspectives and achievements, to hear their voices, which have remained silent for so many centuries. I first encountered my Stepwells nearly half a century ago, when on a summer vacation, I visited my grandparents in Ahmedabad. Obviously, my grandmother thought that I needed some culture, so she sent me off on a bus tour of all the historical sites and buildings in and around Ahmedabad. It was during that trip and the course of that trip that I first visited the Stepwell at Adalaj, and was struck absolutely by its unique grandeur and majestic beauty. Many decades later, I learned that these stepwells, which are a familiar feature of the landscape of Gujarat and actually of Rajasthan also, once numbered in the thousands in the dry and arid parched land where water is scarce and rains are scanty. These wells provided life-giving water to humans and animals and enabled the land to become fertile. What was even more intriguing for me was that of the several hundred stepwells that have been excavated in Gujarat, at least a quarter, 25%, were actually built or commissioned by women. Queens, members of the royalty, wives of rich merchants, ordinary women, and even courtesans and servant girls who hoped to gain religious merit and immortality possibly through the gift of water. Not only did women commission many of the stepwells as patrons and donors, they also frequently served as the inspiration. Stepwells were built to honor and were named after a virtuous wife or a benevolent mother, a local goddess or a beloved mistress. As new research is undertaken with a greater sensitivity to gender issues, it is exciting to envision that more women will emerge as patrons of art and architecture. Women's agency in art will receive the attention it merits. The art of the stepwell honors and celebrates the feminine principle, the creative force in the universe. The goddess in her manifested forms is visible everywhere in the stepwells, occupying not the servile position of the Brahmin wife, but in fact a place of preeminence. Were these wells then an indication of women's growing power and wealth in society? Their striving to place themselves in history's gaze and thereby challenge the stereotypes of their passivity. Women gathered at these stepwells to obtain water, but also to appeal to the local deities for health, happiness, and most of all, children. They performed rituals to ensure their own fertility, to ask for the gift of sons, to ask the goddess to intervene on their behalf so that the milk would flow from their breasts to nurture the newborn. These age-old rituals in and around the stepwells continue even today. The stepwells become a favorite subject in folklore. Every step of these stepwells yield tales of love and betrayal, of courage and sacrifice. I have attempted to identify and translate some of these songs and tales that tell us about the inner lives of these women, whose voices still echo in the now crumbling and dilapidated structure. These stepwells are unique structures because they were not merely utilitarian buildings, they served a dual function. They provided water, but also a site for ritual and propitiation of the local deities. They linked, in other words, three worlds: the subterranean or the terrestrial, the earthly, and the celestial world. There is much we can learn by giving a voice to the countless women forgotten and neglected by history. In doing so, we will have succeeded in some measure in making the invisible visible. I want to spend a few minutes first talking about the significance and sanctity of water and how it relates to women. It goes without saying that water is essential for survival. From the very beginnings of human culture, it has played a vital role in the abundance of crops and in the birth and flowering of civilizations. In Gujarat, a hot tropical region that is also dry and arid, water can make the difference between life and death, since rain is scarce except during the monsoons, and most rivers are devoid of water during the dry season. The inhabitants of the region devised different ways to obtain, store, and manage water. They built deep holes into the ground, sometimes as much as 100 feet, and built steps leading down to the water. These became the first stepwells. Gift of water, according to the ancient Indian texts, the Agni Purana, the Padma Purana, is a gift that brings immortality to people. It is stated in the Padma Purana that whoever builds water buildings will enjoy thousands of years of paradise, and one attains all merit by the endowment of water and goes straight to heaven. Wells were also said to be invested with supernatural powers. The waters were seen as the dwelling place for spirits, and the waters contained medicinal properties to heal the sick and cure the afflicted. It is evident that the healing and curative powers residing in waters of the stepwells caused them to be venerated. Various types of offerings were made: flowers, coconuts, fruits, betel nuts, and so on and so forth. History and legend have linked many of these stepwells to women. One may ask the intriguing question: why did women commission these stepwells, these different kinds of water buildings? And the answer to that is that they wanted not to be forgotten. They wanted to insert themselves on the pages of history, and they wanted to gain merit and immortality in the process. A few comments on women and space, since my book really deals with the issue of women and space. From the very earliest times, women in virtual all societies have been relegated and refined and confined to the domestic sphere, while men's activities link them to the public realm. The underlying assumption being that it is their biological role that explains, and the fact that they give birth to children, which would explain their being identified with the private realm. Being confined and restricted to the home implied that women had fewer or no opportunities to move into the public realm, to establish cross-cutting networks of support and seek and exercise power. The Stepwells then are unique because they provided women with a socially legitimated opportunity to move out of the private domain and, albeit just for a few hours a day, to move into and step out into the public domain. This enabled them to escape the oppression of their daily lives, the exploitation and restriction that they experienced in a deeply patriarchal society. Thus, the stepwells, where women went to fetch water daily, afforded them a brief measure of freedom and autonomy. It allowed them to express their sorrows and frustrations and perhaps seek solace and support from other women. The stepwells then provided a measure of social freedom and served as a safety valve for these women. In Gujarati, we have a saying that Vav to Benoni Pier che. It is the childhood home of the woman. The woman often lacked in India also spatial and psychological space of their own. The stepwells and wells offered them a space where they came to laugh and cry, to share their joys and sorrows, and to while away an hour or so of leisure time, something that they rarely possessed in this society. The songs and folklore emanating from these encounters provide us a glimpse into the inner lives of these women in a gendered society about which we know so little, and which gives us invaluable insight into the lived experiences of these women. In the 19th century, when the stepwells became obsolete and no longer served their original purpose, women once again repossessed them, establishing a claim on these structures and transformed them into what Livingstone calls shrines for the worship of local goddesses. In so doing, they are once again asserting their right to carve out some space for themselves and create their own distinct identity. The women come to the stepwells to restore the order in their universe and to renew it themselves. These stepwells served as inspiration for the countless songs and poems which describe the emotions and feelings of these young women who go to the wells to get water, and the chance encounter and the liaisons or the secret love affairs that result from some of these meetings. One such song goes, and I translate that into English from Gujarati: "How can I go to fetch water, O friend of mine? How can I go to fetch water? A stranger standing at the steps of the well made me bashful and lose all self-control. How can I go to fetch water, my dear friend?" The women came to the wells, stepwells and ponds to fetch water for bathing, but a common concern, absolutely predominant concern for the women was their own fertility. In a society like ours, the curse of barrenness, of not being able to produce a child, is of course a very serious one. She is subject to the taunts and humiliation of the entire society. So a lot of these songs really express the grief of the woman who simply cannot produce enough children. Which is, of course, a great common theme for women. This emotion, of course, is particularly intense. "I'm coming fast with the water pot filled with water, O Rannade." Rannade is, of course, the wife of the sun. So the woman says, "I'm coming fast with the water pot filled with water, O Rannade. Please give me the one who would pull me by the skirt. O mother, the taunts of childlessness are unbearable." So here you see the grief that she's expressing in terms of her own barrenness. And this is a very common refrain in India and certainly in Gujarat. The frustrations and despair of the maiden infatuated with love again appears in the themes. So she goes out from her home on the pretext of fetching water, but really she wants to meet her lover for a few minutes or a few hours. And she says in this song, the rope is 40 arms long, yet could not reach the water, while waiting for my beloved one. The day, after all, is about to end. So she drops the pot in the well inside the water. But her thoughts are not of water, her thoughts are of her beloved. And she thinks she sees his reflection in the water. And as a result of that, while she's thinking of her beloved, she does not let the pot sink into the water, lest the reflected face of her lover be disturbed. So again, you see. Now, the mother-in-law theme is a very common theme in most literature. The oppression in a patriarchal society, the restrictions placed on a young woman, a young bride by her mother-in-law, her sister-in-law, her husband, her father-in-law, particularly the terror of the mother-in-law. And one of these songs that I'm just going to share with you again expresses this, again from the Wagad region, which is a dry region. The young woman is beckoning her grandfather in another village. And she said, "Oh, grandfather, kindly do not give your daughters like me in marriage to somebody in the Wagad region. The quarrelsome mother-in-law of Wagad is difficult to deal with. Oh, grandfather, she makes me grind corn during the day and spin during the night, sends me to fetch water late at night prior to the break of dawn. Oh, grandfather, the pitcher sinks not, since the rope reaches not the water. My sun has arisen and set on the banks of the well. Oh, flying birds, take my message to my grandfather, that your granddaughter has fallen into the well, oh grandfather." So she commits suicide. So one of the themes that is again a very common theme is the theme of sacrifice. This is a motif that really appears in a lot of ancient cultures, that in order to have life-giving waters, in order for the village to enjoy water in the stepwells, sacrifices have to be made. And in this case, of course, the sacrifice has to be made by the young prince, the newly married young prince and his bride. And no sacrifice was seen as too great to quench the thirst of the village and ensure the survival. So the story goes, and this is from a very well-known vow called the Madha vow. For 12 long years we dug a well, but could not locate the underground stream, oh my dear. Astrologers of fame were summoned who predicted, oh my dear, the sacrifice of our son and his wife. This is the newly married couple who offer themselves so that there may be water. We hope profuse water could be located then. The couple, in their bridal best, in their bridal jewelry, start going down the well, which has absolutely not a drop of water. They descend down the 5th step, and the water in the well suddenly starts flowing and immerses them up to the neck. As they go further down to the 6th and the 7th step, all one could see was the pagadi and the chundari of the young bridegroom and the young bride. So they drown, but the water has filled up completely in the well. Thus, according to legend, the sacrifice by the younger couple fills the well with water. Is the very interesting fact that stepwells are ultimately secular buildings, that regardless of who the rulers were, regardless of who the conquerors were, they were protected because they provided much needed water. So in some ways, they are able to transcend the narrow religious differences and sectarian differences between the various religious groups. Many representations of elephants in the stepwell art. Why so? It is believed that in primordial times, the elephant had wings and they consorted with the clouds in the sky. So the elephant is associated in ancient mythology with the ability to bring forth rain. to attract rain. And therefore, since stepwells are water buildings, when the British came in the 19th century, they thought the waters were dirty, unhygienic. They sealed off all the stepwells and forbade women to go to the wells. So the waters have become dirty. Now, I want to argue and say this is very unfortunate. This is sort of very sad to see these wells like that. But the old animals and birds of the stepwells have been replaced now by new creatures who have taken over the water. So when I went once, I was the only one in the stepwells, and my presence must have frightened. So there were 1,000 cooing pigeons and flying bats all over the place, and parrots the color of spring green were flying all over the place. The old animals on the walls may have gone, but they have been replaced by new creatures: the frog, the fish, the turtle, the snake, the mosquito, the flies, and they have taken over the stepwell. The new ones, stepwells, they are not as beautiful. They are rather gaudy. There's gold and tinsel and silk and satin. But what is important in the stepwells is that women who now no longer go to the stepwells to fetch water claim these wells and put erected shrines to their local goddesses right next to or adjacent to the stepwells. Today they still gather there to ask the goddess for fertility, for breast milk, for children, for sons, for happiness, for long life for their husbands. And the women come here once again to gather, to share their joys and sorrows, their pains and grief. And it has continued to remain a space for women, where they can network, where they can share their inner lives, where they can, for a few moments in the daytime, they can enjoy leisure time. But this is very much a celebration of women and women's art and women's contribution and their own unique identities and space. Thank you very much.